We now have our first panel discussion, Tracing the Development of Teaching Methodology in Chinese Education, 1903 to the present day. This panel is moderated by Professor Zhao Honghan. Professor Han is Professor of Applied Linguistics in the Department of Arts and Humanities at Teachers College. She first came here as an assistant professor in 1999 and has done very well. She is now a full professor. Let's welcome Professor Han.
Thank you, Mo. A warm welcome to the first panel discussion. And as an honorary professor of Southeast University, see I'm wearing the badge here. It's my pleasure and honor to host the first panel discussion. The theme of this panel is the influence of Guo Pingwen on education in China from 1903 to the present day. And in this panel, there are 4 speakers, and they're sitting here. All of them are experts in the history of Chinese education. So we're on to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Ding Gang, who is a professor and dean of the Institute of Advanced Studies in Education, East China Normal University. And his main areas of interest include education culture and social development, teacher education and teacher professional development, and educational narrative inquiry. And he's a prolific writer. He has produced many works, scholarly work. Among them, I'm just going to mention a few titles of his monographs. One of the books he produced was entitled Voice and Experience, Narrative Inquiry in Education. Another book, International Research on Chinese Education. Another book, Academy of Classical Learning and Chinese Culture, and the list goes on and on and on. The title of his presentation today is A College, a Generation, and an Era. Let's welcome him to the podium.
Thanks for Chen, and so respect to the Suda Forum and Jensen and everybody. So it's my pleasure for the presentation here. So my presentation, the title is A College, a Generation, and so Teachers College of the Columbia University in the first half and the 20th century has been the center of the world education. In China's perspective, the TC, the training, a generation of the Chinese educate and the change end. So, objectively speaking, so perhaps no college does that TC that has so important influence in modern China. So the first, before some of the examples, the first, when Chinese students study at TC, John Dewey is the hadn't the specific the guidance or anyone who will run the education. This means the Chinese student, but the has the education idea of the democracy and the still reflected in their dissertations. So when Dewey went to the China, the Chinese society, the had been in the pursuit of the scientific and the democratic sentiments. So Dewey is serious to meet the demand of the times. So John Dewey's influence of the thought to become the promoted in China, in modern China. So, and also in TC, the scientific, so proposed the influence on the science education research, different from the Davis, Davis. So the advocate the education, the scientific research for the guidance of the Chinese student in 1920s to in 1930s of the 20th century. So scientists, the orientation of the education research and the development that has to play as a contribute role. And apart from this, the China Institute in America, so the Huamei Xijinse, so the founded by the Guo Bingwen, Hu Si, John David, and the Paul Moran. And at the New York in May 1926. And the Guo Bingwen, the service as the first director. This is the oldest and one of the most profound advocate community in China-US relations. So it's the pioneer in the development of the China-US relations. The Institute in America has become the model of the education for an understanding and the friendship between China and the US. So however, the pioneers of the China's education is not just confined to the United States the experience. Then the reform initiative that has come from even more profound cultural feelings, and that showed the historical mission of the transformation China. Therefore, in Sino-American cultural and educational exchanges, their efforts to find a development path suited to the China's education. So, for example, the Hu Si and the set of the new cultural movement, the way and the influence of the Davis thought, but from the classic to the vernacular, the creativity is not only the emerging of the new literature genre, but that is a carrier of the culture, language changing, you left the acoustic education and the culture changing. In essence, the action is extremely to China culture. As another example, the Guo Bingwen, also called China, needed time to adjust herself to new conditions with a new surround her. In his doctoral dissertation, this vision respected in his thoughts and the Southeast University founded, and can also be assigned as the testimony and seeking the development way of the Chinese university in today is a Southeast University's architecture, the mixed Western and the Chinese style. So one more example from the Tao Xingzi. The Chinese Davis education is life, into the life education, and organized the Xiaozhang School to make the Chinese rural education experiment. He thought educational way to be more in line with the Chinese actual situation of rural education. So we're here today to commemorate to Dr. Guo Bingwen. We need to thank the Columbia University Teachers College, has changed a generation of the Chinese educators. We would also like to thank this generation of the Chinese educators that through the effort that has opened as a new area for Chinese education. So a college like this generation and this amazing time, they were always the driving force of our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Geng Youquan, who's a professor of higher education at the Higher Education Research Institute of Southeast University. Professor Geng's areas of expertise include higher education management, Contemporary and Modern Chinese Higher Education History, and Academic Degrees and Graduate Education. And his publications are numerous. So here I just mentioned a few. He has a monograph that came out in 2007 entitled Comparing Moral Principles of Confucius and Western Education. And he had another monograph that came out in 2011 entitled Dr. Guo Bingwen and Southeast University. Another one, Educational Philosophy of Dr. Guo Bingwen, which was published by the Southeast University Press in 2014. Let's give Professor Geng a welcome.
Honorable President Susan Furham, distinguished experts and scholars, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Han, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here to deliver a speech. My topic today is the influences of Columbia University on Southeast University. Throughout the history of the China higher education, the influence of Columbia University on Southeast University has been much greater than its influence on any other university in China. This influence dates back to a very famous Chinese educator, Guo Bingwen. He was the first president of Southeast University. Here, I'd like to talk about the influence from the following 6 aspects. Education conception. During his presidency from 1919 to 1925, Mr. Guo transformed his educational concept from pure academic teaching into meeting social needs. This change resulted from the influence of famous American educator John Dewey's philosophy of pragmatism. It can also derive from Mr. Guo's doctoral dissertation, for he got his PhD degree from Columbia University. Second, in the 1920s, China had 2 famous teachers' colleges. One was in Beijing, the other was in Nanjing. Beijing High Normal School was modeled on the Japanese educational system as an independent organization, while Nanjing Higher Normal School adopted Columbia University's system by incorporating the teacher school into the university. On his efforts, the National Southeastern University, which is now called Southeast University, was set up in 1921. Third, internationalization. Before he became president, Nanjing Higher Normal School had no foreigner exchange program. But after he came into office, he began to open the school doors to the outside world. In 1918, he began to introduce Science Society of China to Southeast University. He also invited Professor John Dewey and Paul Monroe for a visit. He was elected 3 times as the vice chairman of the World Educational Association. This further helped promote the school's international status. Fourth, management system. In order to keep pace with the world, he began to implement a democratic school administrative policy. He adopted a board of directors called for academic freedom, encouraging professors to supervise the school and the students to exercise self-discipline. All this turns Southeast University into a school with a brand new modern management style. 5, co-education. Deeply impressed by the American co-education, he was a strong supporter of women education in China. So, when he became president, he began to enroll female students. This served as a new model of school administration, pioneering co-education in China. 6. The four balances. As a Chinese scholar in the West, he'd like to take a moderate way. Accordingly, he introduced the concept of balance into education. The four balances are the balance between well-rounded education and specialized education, the balance between education in science and in the humanities, the balance between investment in teaching faculty and investment in teaching facilities, and the balance between national and international learning. In conclusion, in line with the traditions inherited from Mr. Guo, today's Southeast University firmly adheres to 3 principles: to build Southeast into a comprehensive research university with innovation as its guiding principle, to balance the cultivation of personnel with the satisfaction of social and economic needs, and to keep internationalization as a strategy in school administration. Looking back, we feel honored, for we used to have Mr. Guo, a graduate from Columbia University, as our president. Looking forward, we feel honored too, for we continue to have Columbia University, a world-class university, as our friend and a company. I strongly believe that with our joint efforts, both universities can have an even greater future. Thank you.
Our third speaker is Professor Zhang Yaquan, who's a professor of education at the Institute of Education at Xiamen University. Professor Zhang's research interests include the history and theory of higher education, famous presidents, general education, examination system, overseas Chinese education, and so on and so forth. Among his publications are the monograph entitled The Reform and Abolishment of Imperial Examination and the Transformation of Higher Education in Modern China, and another book entitled Pursue Excellence, Strive for Perfection, Xiamen University President of Lin Bonkeng. The book was published by Shandong Educational Press in 2012. Third book, The Independent Recruitment of Higher Education Institutions and the Reform of College Entrance Examination, which was published in 2012. Without a further enumerating his scholarly work, I just want to tell you that the title of his presentation is The Concept of Liberal Education of Guo Bingwen and its Modern Value. So let's welcome him to the podium.
Everybody, thank you so much for Columbia University Teacher College. I come here. My lecture is about concept of liberal arts education of Guo Bingwen and its modern value. My lecture includes 4 parts. The first part 1 is the concept of liberal arts education goes PhD dissertation. This dissertation is my lecture. Georgia from the literature goes doctor dissertation is the earliest and relative conduct resource that we can understand his liberal education. First of all, Dr. Guo called a cool idea, liberal arts education. Is closely related to life, prepare the individual to participate in the daily activities of life, but not prepare ration for official life. This idea, I think, is very, very important because from this idea, he analyzed the Chinese education history. Second, Gu have appreciated the education value and the history status of pre-Qin Confucianism. He pointed out, under the old system of education, the class literature formed the center of school curriculum. It is this training which, he said, it is this training which has produced in the Chinese pupil some of the fine and stable qualities which have been the strength of the nation for many ages. Third, Dr. Gu advocated that the reform of education, China education, should meet the needs of the modern social life, enhance scientific education, stand up our own measures, reduce the contents of moral training. He said, the sooner this is done, the better it will be for China. Part 2, development of Gu's liberal education idea through his education practice. During 10 years of practice from Nanjing Advanced Normal School to Nanjing Southeast University, Gu developed contents of liberal education concepts. There are some remarkable features of nationality, modernity, and inheritance for Gu's liberal arts education concept. Part 3, the course of Gu's concept of liberal arts education and its influence. Gu Bingwen was deeply influenced by Western education and Chinese tradition culture as well. It created cultures of East and West, which enriched his liberal education as concepts. Gu's ideas of liberal education had a far richer history influence upon school and or university management. Part 4. From Gu's education's idea and practice, we can gain following inspirations. 1. Liberal education, liberal general education is a very way to success for learner, especially in China, today China education. 2. To provide general education, we ensure how history and international view infuse the faith of the West into Chinese merits. 3. Higher education should implement the combination of general education and special education. 4. Curriculums needs to be kept with the balance of humanities and science. To sum up, it is good for continuation to explore Gu's Bingwen's concept of liberal education and his practice. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker for this panel is Professor Chu Zhaohui, who currently is a research fellow at the China National Institute of Education Science. And Professor Chu's interests are really wide-ranging. He was actually formerly a physicist who then discovered his interest in education. So during the break, you can go to him and find out why he changed his interest from physics to education. His publications include Rebuilding of Chinese Education, a monograph, another monograph entitled History and Reflection of Chinese University Spirit, and another one, Record of Doing and Knowing in Education Reform, which was published in 2007. I'm not going to, again, enumerate his other publications, but he's a very prolific writer. The title of his presentation today is The Interaction and Choice of Guo Bingwen and Tao Xingzhi in the Process of China's Education Modernization. Professor Chu.
Good morning, every friend. Since 1981, I'm interested in Tao Xingzhi. Since this time, I'm interested in Columbia University, TC. In last 2 years, I have translated the Guo Bingwen's Distance in current Chinese. This book has published by Chemistry Press. Now, we will talk about Tao Xingzhi and Guo Bingwen. First, their intersection of life between Guo and Tao. In August 1914, Guo and Tao intersection in Nanjing. Since the middle of the intersection is Huang Yanpei and Jiang Qian. In 1917 and 1925, they have a direct close contact. In 1918 and 1921, they have they are up and up. When the Guo up and the Tao up, they have a promotion in Chinese education modernization in in every place. First, the transformation of Chinese education, making use of education research in Europe and American, include Columbia University. And the famous thing is facilitating John Dewey's lecture tour in China. They joined effort to manage Chinese National Association for the Advancement of Education. This association, the mission is to investigate the real situation of education, to do academic research in education and to improve education. This association set up solid research and organizational foundation for Chinese new education, from forming way relationship between Tao and Guo in this association. They active participation in the World Conference on Education. Tao Xingzhi have made a prepares a sale of documents and material under the name of CNAAE. As the chief representative of China, Guo Bingwen attended the World Conference 3 times and was elected as the vice president of World Conference of the Education on Education. Another thing is they support each other. They realize the co-education in Southeast education and work for Nanjing High Number School and Southeastern education, and advocate student autonomy. Guo and Tao are great educator of Chinese education, but they are different in first, the go and always keep from keep from politics, even in the year 1925, when he was involved in the politics. But Tao is really ridiculous in reconstruction. He is close to Chelsea and monist, and what he calls holding a heart without asking for anything in return. Today's China's education has many problems, and we should learn from Guo and Tao, but they are different. How can we do 无水与归? Thank you.
Thank you to all the 4 speakers. And I want to initiate a special round of applause for them, for their courage and effort to speak English here. It would have been unthinkable 15 years ago. So that alone shows that a lot of progress has been made in Chinese foreign language education.